Hi X. So, here's this. Something happened to me on the morning of September 24th, 2003. For the years, I had discarded the whole thing as a dream or a hallucination until I came across a picture on Instagram that perfectly described the place I visited on that fateful day, 18 years ago. First of all, you will have to excuse my terrible English. I was born in South Africa in 1981, but moved to Argentina when I was 3, which is where I grew up. Everything was always as normal as it gets. There was really nothing special about me or my life. On September 24th, 2003, however, I was involved in a pretty heavy traffic accident. I was driving a motorbike when a woman came out of nowhere, trying to cross the street. The car next to me swerved to avoid her, and ended up hitting me and another car. When I woke up, I was there. I was in what you now call the Backrooms. When I came across the pic related, I knew immediately that that was the same place where I had been, or had dreamed I had been, all those years ago. I tried to devour every thread and YouTube video I could find on the topic, but at some point, it just became way too much, way too complex, and way too different from what I experienced. For me, it was much simpler. I woke up alone in a room. Old carpet, yellowish walls, bright buzzing lights. Not exactly the same as the picture, but eerily close to it. The room was totally square, about 2.5 meters tall, and with no furniture or other objects of any kind. I woke up lying on the carpet in the middle of the room. I was wearing the same clothes I had at the time of the accident, but my watch was gone. Parts of the carpet around me appeared to be stained with big black dots. I felt something on my forehead and realized that there was blood on my hands, arms, head, and pants, but I was not injured or cut or even in pain. I did feel slightly dizzy and confused. When I got up to my feet and looked around, I thought to myself that I must be at the hospital. The room had an exit with no door that led to what appeared to be a hallway, so that's where I walked, and that is where the nightmare began. The panic came very soon, although it's certainly amazing how long you can keep telling yourself that there must be some explanation. I must have walked for over an hour through hundreds of empty rooms and long hallways, all with the same carpet, yellowish walls, and buzzing lights. Everything was empty, and there was nothing that could serve as some sort of landmark, but somehow, I knew that every room was different. For 8 hours, I roamed through the back rooms. Then, on the 9th hour, I found a shoe. It's hard to describe the extreme joy that I felt after finding something so mundane. It was just a shoe, just one, in the corner of a room. It was a little girl's shoe. It looked like the shoe girls would wear to church in the late 1980s. That is the best reference I can give you. Just a shoe. But it was at least something. It gave the back room some sense of scale, and it gave me some sense of hope. I picked it up and put it in my jacket. I walked for another 8 hours and found some more objects throughout the many rooms. A broken pair of glasses, an empty tissue box, a chessboard with no pieces. A beautiful volume of Aquinas Summa Theologica, printed in London in 1902, and some aluminum foil. I even found a room with a dirty couch in it. It somehow seemed that I was getting closer to civilization, whatever that meant. What I hadn't been able to find, however, was food or water. With very little energy left, I resigned myself to camp for the night. The bright buzzing lights did not allow such distinctions. Take some rest and hope for the best the next day. The voice woke me up. I knew right away that it was a human voice, though I couldn't quite make out what it was saying. I jumped to my feet and started to pay attention to where the voice was coming from so I could follow it. As I was getting closer, I could hear what it was saying. It sounded like it was in Dutch, and it just kept counting again and again, the numbers just going up. I looked in room after room, turning from hallway to hallway, and the voice became much clearer. I just kept hearing the same Dutch counting. I finally got to a large, rectangular room, which actually looked populated. There were 2 couches, an old wooden table, and some trash. It was the least empty room I'd found until that point, and there, in the corner, was a man in a squatting position, looking at the wall and waving his hand as he counted numbers in Dutch. The man was probably in mid-30s. He was bald, had a thick beard and dark skin. He heard me come into the room, interrupted his counting, and turned his head to look at me. He looked surprised to see me standing there, but not really shocked. After staring at me for a few seconds, he turned his head back to the wall and resumed his counting. As tired and dehydrated as I was ecstatic to find another human being, so I approached him and greeted him in Afrikaans, which I can barely speak anymore. He stopped counting, got up to his feet, and looked at me with more interest now, and asked me how I knew the language of his father. I told him I was born in a place where many people spoke a similar language, and he looked at me with a funny smile and told me that was impossible. He then handed me an old plastic bottle, so old that the plastic had turned yellow, with some water in it, and I drank until the bottle was empty. Without saying a word, he handed me a chocolate energy bar and pointed towards one of the couches, where there were bags of chips and some other junk food. We both ate in silence for a while, until he asked me who I was and what I was doing here. I told him my name and said that I was lost. I asked him his name and what the place was. My father called me son, so that's what you can call me. This place is the world. I told him that the world surely extended beyond the yellowish walls, but once again, he looked at me like he did not understand. There is no beyond. This is the world, and those who look for an exit are foolish. My father told me this. I learned that Son had been in the Backrooms since he was a little kid. Both his father and him were transported decades before from what I suspect was somewhere in Indonesia. He had no memory of the front rooms. The Backrooms was all that he knew. I asked him about this exit that his father used to talk about. He told me many people think that the world is a labyrinth, and that many spend their lives looking for a way out. His father, who had probably looked for an exit for years, had finally resigned himself to live the rest of his life in the Backrooms. I told Son that I was foolish too, because I also thought that there must be a way out. I told him I was determined to find it, and all I needed was to know where to procure food and water. To my surprise, he decided to come with me. Only a few rooms from Son's room, there was a passageway to a particularly large hallway where the carpet felt wet. A single faucet came out of one of the far walls, and it was dripping constantly. It could not really be opened, but if you left a water bottle underneath it for long enough, then it would fill all the way to the top. Incredibly, there were also 2 vending machines on that same wall. The glass had been broken, and junk food was pouring out of both of them. That was Son's oasis, where he could get food and water to survive. When I asked him what he would do when the food ran out, he looked at me with surprise and told me matter-of-factly that it has never run out. I asked him why he didn't live in that room with the food and water, and he said that sometimes it got too crowded and that he didn't like some of the groups that also came for supplies. After stocking up on food or water, it was time to go. I asked Son how big the world was and how well he knew it. He told me it was not infinite, but that its real size had not been revealed to any man. He said that he knew the land of Son very well, which was the term he used to describe all the rooms and the hallways he had mapped out in his head. I then inquired if his father had ever come close to finding this exit or anything related to it, but he firmly rejected the idea. Son would not recommend where to go, and he didn't even want to lead the way. He just wanted to follow me. For a moment, I pondered between 2 options, trying to keep walking on a straight line as much as the layout of the rooms allowed it, and hope that we would eventually get to the edge of the world. The other option was to follow the ancient Greeks' advice to escape a labyrinth, which is to always turn left. I decided on the second one, and just like that, Son and I were on our way to find an exit to the back rooms. For 7 days we roamed. It was hard to keep track of time, but I am sure it was at least 7 days with 7 nights. I learned about the back rooms. I learned that large rectangular rooms with water faucets and seemingly bottomless vending machines were a relatively common feature, each one no more than a day's journey from the other. I learned that even though it's mostly empty space, we were definitely not alone. One day we saw a little blonde girl crying alone in a corner, but when we approached, she just ran away. One night, as we were sleeping, an old German man came to us, begging for water. We found 2 Chinese twins that couldn't or wouldn't talk to us. There was emptiness and confusion in everybody's eyes. I want to make clear right now that everything I saw in the back rooms had the same aesthetic. Dull carpet, yellowish walls, bright buzzing lights. I know people talk about different levels, about low-hanging mist, about some kind of creature or monster lurking around. I never saw or heard any of that. Everything was that carpet, those walls, and those lights. An occasional pipe or duct would decorate a room, but for the most part, that is how it was. I did learn from Sun that the back rooms did not always look like this, but he didn't know how they looked before. Sun also told me that there were many families or groups in the world, and not all of them were good. I never saw any of these groups until the very last day, when we found the Cult of the Stair. The Cult of the Stair was about a group of 20 people, men and women, who lived in one of the largest rooms I ever saw in the back rooms. It even had free vending machines. They had a leader, which they called Just Us, and even though they spoke English between themselves, I could clearly see it was a very international group. Just Us was originally from Spain, which you would think would have made it easier for me to communicate with him, but everyone there seemed to be in some sort of perpetual enlightened, /brainwashed, /crazy state that made it really hard to get answers to my questions. Sun distrusted them all, and told me many times that we should continue our own journey. However, that is when Just Us took me to their holy place, the stair. A few hallways away from their main room, the Cult of the Stair had their ceremonial center, a room with a staircase. It was just an ugly concrete staircase with cheap metal railing, and it went up and down, with no visible end in sight either way. I asked where the staircase led, and they told me it led up and down. Same carpet, same walls, same lights, just apparently infinite levels of it. I learned that every 7 cycles, some arbitrary unit of time that the cult defined, they would offer a sacrifice to the stairs, and someone would let themselves be thrown down the shaft. They would watch the person fall until they disappeared from sight. I was so shocked by these pagan practices that I failed to notice when they made a circle around us. Someone very strong hugged me from behind and held me in place, while someone else was very quickly tying my hands behind my back. Some put up a good fight, and he even managed to knock down one of the bigger guys, but he was also ultimately subdued. The last few things I remember is the chanting, the screaming, and the praying. I remember seeing Sun out of the corner of my eye as he was thrown down the stair shaft, and then me. Then I was flying through the air, falling down the shaft. I fell down it for what seemed like an eternity, and then darkness. Complete darkness, more darkness, and then some hospital sounds. I was lying on a bed in an Italian hospital in Buenos Aires. My whole family was there. Doctors were there, and even the family lawyer was there. They told me I was in a bad traffic accident and had a broken rib. Other than that, I was okay. Time went by, and I always thought of the whole thing as some sort of anesthesia-induced dream. Sometimes though, very once in a while, I wonder if Sun is living a good life back in Indonesia. That's actually a great question, and something I forgot to mention. According to my family, I was unconscious for a little over 20 minutes, maybe less. This has always been hard for me to comprehend, as I'm sure I spent at least 9 days in the backrooms. Backrooms as railings. I've seen a lot of people posting about the newly discovered backrooms. A lot of thoughtful debate and theories have been going on, but none have quite hit the mark yet, so I'm going to tell you all what I know. The original post describes the backrooms as what you enter when you no-clip out of reality. This is a rather confusing analogy, as it implies physics has to break down in order to gain, or be forced, entry into the backrooms. What actually happens is a fourth-dimensional movement in which you shift along an axis humans cannot comprehend. Consider a 2D cartoon character. They can move up, down, left, and right, and all of their friends will watch them as if nothing happened. However, if they were to move backwards, their 2-dimensional friends would freak out as their friend suddenly phased out of reality, disappearing. No clipping, as the original poster put it, but in our 3-dimensional world, we would perceive their movement as normal. What this does not mean, however, is that this 2D character has entered the 3rd dimension. They have always been in the 3rd dimension, but have never been able to comprehend it. We are the same way, 3-dimensional beings existing in the 4th dimension, but never moving across the axis defined by it. By some powerful energy shift, death, an explosion, or just a really hard fall, you can make a 4th dimensional shift. The last lines of the original post reference an unnamed creature that is in your best interest to avoid. What is erroneous, however, is that this creature only exists in the backrooms. This is false, and part of a much larger phenomenon. Most staircases come with railings, stylistic emulations of one-dimensional objects, lines, on either side to provide support and direction for those scaling the stairs. The backrooms, in a sense, are these railings brought up into higher dimensions in order for higher dimensional beings to be able to follow some kind of path. This explains their straight walls and rather empty appearance and unpleasant moldy odors. You don't need to lavishly decorate the interior of a railing if all you care about is an exterior that will provide support and guidance. This leads us to the strangest property of the backrooms: interdimensional cross-sections. What we can't know because of this is what the creatures actually look like. For every shift across the fourth dimensional axis, the creature has a different three-dimensional cross-section. Imagine cutting a piece of wood parallel to the base. If you were to cut it 3 inches up the base, the shapes of the rings would be slightly different than the patterns another few inches up. These are 2-dimensional cross-sections of the 3-dimensional log. Just the slightest step across the 4D axis would radically change the creature, making it impossible to tell what they truly look like. The backrooms are unaffected by small variations in movement. However, as they are built for guidance and thus duplicate across many cross-sections in case a creature does not perfectly land their hand in a certain area the first time when trying to get a grip. This could also explain the levels some people claim to experience, why the backrooms change over time. Subtle fourth-dimensional shifts can slowly accumulate, pushing you further and further throughout the backrooms, creating new cross-sections which have been interpreted as levels until eventually you come out the other side, which holds God knows what. Backrooms. That's fitting, maybe too accurate. I call it the real state. There is a lot for me to explain on the subject, as I was for many years trying to figure out its mystery. First of all, the real state is what it points to be representing, but cannot be truly made clear to anyone unless you have actually been in it. Secondly, no matter how hard you try to reach it, you will never find a way to do it. It is spontaneous, can happen to anyone, but generally speaking, if you've been in once, you will end up going back eventually. There are also a set of rules. These are not written, nor do I claim them to be a factual representation of real estate's true reality, but what during the years I've managed to see as axioms that may hold some answers to how real estate works that I can point to and explain bit by bit. 1. Never try to escape. 2. Be always calm. Don't show any signs of anxiety. 3. Do not search for others. Do not ask for anyone. 4. Stay as close to your entrance as possible. 5. Never directly stare at any source of light. 6. Should you lose your senses, do anything to regain them, even if it means cutting off a part of your body. 7. Always check if the time is what you remember it to be. 8. Do not touch a wall that seems darker than the one next to it. 9. Should you come across another human being, do not make any contact, and move away from each other as fast as possible. 10. Count seconds, and after every 500, remember who you are and where you came from. 11 is the most important. Sit down and do not look at the sounds when you hear them. I'm going to explain these points one by one. 1. Never try to escape. This is crucial to understand, that thinking about how to escape makes your mind go haywire, panic, and eventually you lose yourself in it, running around and away from your entry point. Losing your senses will eventually extend onto your track and perception of time itself, which is why you should always check on it, count seconds, and always try to remember who you are. If everything fails, go to extremes. You don't need a knife to hurt yourself. Bash head first into a wall if you must regain your senses. I learned this the hard way, but getting yourself calm, point 2, is important to thinking straight and crucial to really getting out. You are not going to run out of this. No matter how many kilometers you'd run, you will never escape it this way. It is your emotions keeping the rooms extending. At least that is one of my assumptions. Another one has to do with points 3 and 9. Do not search for others. Do not interact with them should you bump into anyone. You do not know who they are, how they react, and how long they have been there. This is why you count seconds. If you lose track of time, you lose track of reality, and then your emotions, which is what can get you into a nasty situation and can even mean your death. Most of the time, others don't know it, wandering aimlessly further and further away from their entry point. They are lost to time because time in real state does not follow our space-time continuum rules. It relies on you to keep it meaningful. Think of it as if the time had no concept in real state, and only the beings that perceive it can understand and think it. But other than you thinking seconds, it is closely to non-existent there. Closely, because there are a multitude of beings whom still perceive it in their minds. Coming across one another shows signs that time only means a variable in a form of a living being, and these living beings can be anything. I call it real state because it strips down the reality of its dimensions that we humans coherently understand to be a physical world. There is no real space that you can measure there. Sure, you could measure the rooms, calculate its density, but then if you check the atmosphere, there wouldn't be any oxygen or any other particle in it. Breathe in consciously and try to comprehend what just happened, and then remember, be calm. There is only the timeless perception stretching endlessly before you that extends onto any other being that happens to be within, meaning not only human, I call them plainly others. The first time I saw one was also the first time I was in the real state. I was already panicking, already wandered too far, and lost track of time. I lost my senses seeing an otherworldly creature that I can only describe as a crystalline form of ant and the size of a giraffe. I turned around and ran, screaming. I did not think about escaping from there and then, just from the creature, which is why I think I ended up being let go from the real state. This led me to one conclusion that much later came as this: sit down, do not look at whatever came in. As far as you are concerned, there are only intelligent beings in there. Seeing how I haven't come across any insect or large animal, which as you'd think would greatly outnumber the total of humans, right? The other beings, whatever they might be, are of no concern to us. We cannot converse, we cannot understand each other or help one another. There is no point in agitating ourselves further in that situation. Points 5 and 8 might come as weird after coming to understand the real state as an unchangeable constant, but it is also precisely why these points come out as somewhat exotic but logic phenomena. First off, the light source. Real state has no real source of light. I presume the light is there because your perception demands it. Perhaps if you were blind, your mind would create a more fitting environment, but for me, it seems to be in an unchanging, bright orange light, not like the first picture, but again, different perceptions. So, if the light is always the same, wherever you go, what about pulsating light that seems to suddenly appear behind you, or show up in another room? I like to call these white holes, as in the proposed reversals of black holes. One of my assumptions to the reality behind the backrooms is that it is a tunnel that we somehow end up in, coherent enough to observe and touch, but not act upon. Perhaps the other beings use it consciously, which is why they never seem to be interested in us. I was, after all, never harmed by any of them. But here comes that dark wall. It completely obliterates the previous concept, because dark walls are the actual exit/entrance points, and not the white hole that it would suggest to be. Why then stay away from them if those are the entries/exits? For the same reason, you should stay close by to your own entry point. Imagine a space not distorted by time, a seemingly unending one, with your own private entrance. How many more like these are there, and each leading to other points in space-time, or something completely different, not understood by us? This is also why I wrote that the back room is a fitting name. Perhaps it's the back of our consciousness. Point is clear here, however. Stay clear of the dark walls, but your own entry point. There is also a discrepancy here as to the entry point. Sometimes, you can get ejected from the room, completely randomly. It can happen right away, or a month or a year in. I got myself to be ejected while running away from the other being, but I also got myself to be ejected while being completely calm. This will conclude my observations on what the real state/backrooms is, but I still wait till the day that I again will enter it. Each time I come more prepared than the last, and each time I begin to understand more and more about the place that I find myself in. The backrooms are a maze-like labyrinth of prefabricated rooms used to load reality. Those that are quite psychotic or on the verge of seeing through reality often end up clipping out of the matrix and can end up in the backrooms. Individuals often find the rooms have a feel like that of rooms in the late 60s and 70s, though the lights are on and there are no switches at all. Many people simply starve to death trying to find an escape, resorting to trying to eat the drywall or carpet of the structures. Individuals attempt to find moisture in the walls and build a dwelling within the old 70s rooms, building carpet beds and trying to find respite from the ever-bright green fluorescent lights in order to sleep. In order to escape the backrooms, you must become fully convinced that this is where you are meant to be, and feel as if you're moving through your own house or workspace. Only then will your home or old dwelling materialize around you, and then you will be out of the backroom matrix. Individuals who've escaped the backrooms often feel like they are still in it and are permanently psychologically damaged from the understanding that their real life is inherently false. Many individuals often end up taking their own lives,